A maid whispered 2 words to the Duke at his own engagement feast, and saved his life. But what she said next about his fiancée would shake an entire kingdom. Nobody listens to a maid. This Duke did. The candles in Duke Lucien's great hall had never burned brighter. 300 flames danced across silver chandeliers, throwing gold light over silk gowns, jeweled throats, and goblets filled to the brim with Velvet red, the rarest wine in the kingdom. Musicians played in the corner. Laughter rolled like waves between long tables draped in white linen. Outside the tall windows, the capital glittered beneath a clear autumn sky. It was, by every measure, the most celebrated night of the year. Duke Lucien Aldrath stood at the head of the grand table, straight-backed and composed, the way powerful men learn to stand when every eye in the room is watching. He was 31, dark-haired, and not the kind of man who smiled easily. But tonight, he smiled. Tonight, after 2 years of political negotiations, royal approvals, and enough paperwork to fill a library, Lady Evelyn Ashford was finally home. She sat to his left, breathtaking in pale ivory silk, her dark hair pinned beneath a pearl headpiece. She had been abroad for nearly 4 years, sent to the royal court of Valdres at 15 to complete her noble education. She had returned, polished, elegant, and completely at ease with the room's admiration. The sort of woman born for a throne room. Lucien raised his jeweled goblet. The hall quieted instantly. 4 years is a long time, he said, his voice carrying without effort across the room. But tonight, that wait ends. To Lady Evelyn, and to the future of Aldrich, 300 guests lifted their glasses. And that is the precise moment the maid stepped forward. She appeared from nowhere, or rather, from the invisible space servants always occupy at events like these. Just behind the important people, just out of sight, carrying things and saying nothing. She was plain, brown dress, brown hair, hands rough from work. The kind of woman no one at that table would remember the next morning. She leaned close to Lucien's ear. "Do not drink that, Your Grace." Her voice was barely above breath, but the words landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. Lucien did not flinch. He did not look at her. The smile stayed fixed on his face because 300 people were still watching, and a duke does not flinch in public. He lowered the goblet, slowly, naturally, the way a man might pause mid-toast to clear his throat. "The wine smells a little sharp," he announced with an easy shrug, setting the goblet down and reaching for a water glass instead. "Too much travel on it, perhaps. My apologies. Pour from the second barrel tonight." Polite laughter. Servants moved. The moment passed. No one noticed except Lucien. He glanced sideways at the maid, who had already stepped back into her proper invisible place. Her face was perfectly calm. Her hands were folded. But her eyes, they were not on the goblet she had just warned him about. They were on Eveline, and the expression in them was not concern, it was fear. Lucien filed that away. He was a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts by the age of 28. He had learned, expensively, never to ignore the small things. During the next toast, he leaned toward his captain of the guard, a steady man named Rowan, seated 1 chair down, and murmured 4 words without moving his lips. "Switch cups with me." Rowan asked no questions. He never did. That was why Lucien trusted him. The switch happened beneath the table, smooth as a card trick. When the next toast was called, it was Rowan's hand that raised Lucien's original goblet. Rowan drank. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. Then a sound cut through the music, a chair scraping violently backward, a crash of silver hitting stone. Rowan was on the ground, his body rigid, hands clawing at his chest, his face turning the particular shade of gray that belongs only to poison. The hall erupted. Women screamed. Men leapt back from the table. Servants ran in every direction at once. In the chaos, Lucien did not run. He stood completely still and looked at Evelyn. She was on her feet like everyone else, 1 hand pressed to her mouth, performing shock with perfect precision. Her eyes were wide. Her brow was furrowed. Every feature arranged in the exact expression a woman should wear when her betrothed's guard has just collapsed at a dinner party. It was flawless. That was the problem. Real shock is messy. It makes people freeze in the wrong direction, or laugh at horrible moments, or ask the same question twice. This was not real shock. This was a performance so controlled it could only come from practice. Lucien was still watching her when the maid appeared at his elbow again. The hall was in full chaos now. Guards shouting, physicians being summoned, nobles pressing toward the exits. She did not order it herself, the maid said, her eyes still on Evelyn across the room. She never touches anything directly, but she knew. "Who are you?" Lucian asked quietly. "My name is Anna. I served in Lady Evelyn Ashford's family estate for 4 years before her parents died." She paused. "Your Grace, I have been trying to reach you for 6 weeks." Lucian turned to look at her fully for the first time. "And the accusation you made," he said carefully, "about the woman in the ivory dress." Anna met his eyes without blinking. "That is not Lady Evelyn," she said. "I don't know who she is, but I know who she isn't. And if you marry her in 8 days, you will not survive the wedding night." Across the hall, the false Evelyn was speaking quietly to a lord at the far end of the table, her hand on his arm, her expression now shifting, not to relief that the danger had passed, but to something that looked very much like calculation. Rowan was carried out on a stretcher, barely breathing. The goblet, Lucian noticed, had already disappeared from the table. Someone had taken it in the chaos, and whoever had taken it had been ready to take it. That meant someone in this room had expected exactly this moment, and had planned for what came after. Lucian picked up his water glass and took a slow, calm sip. 8 days until the wedding. He had a great deal of work to do. The castle infirmary smelled of vinegar and burnt herbs. Rowan lay on a narrow cot near the window, his breathing shallow but steady. The physicians had worked quickly. Charcoal purge, cold compresses, bitter antidotes that left dark stains around his mouth. He would live. Barely, but he would live. Lucian stood at the door long enough to confirm that, then turned away. He had other business tonight. Anna was waiting in the linen storage room 2 corridors down, a small, windowless space that smelled of cedar and old wool. Lucian had chosen it deliberately. No fireplaces meant no hidden ears pressed against warm walls. He arrived alone, without even a candle boy, and pulled the door shut behind him. Anna stood in the center of the room, hands folded, spine straight. For a servant, she held herself remarkably still. Not the stillness of someone frightened into silence, but the stillness of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times and was finally having it. "Talk," Lucian said. She did. She had grown up the daughter of a minor estate steward in Blackmere, the rural province where the Ashford family kept their ancestral manor. When she was 14, her father was hired to manage the household accounts, and Anna came with him. She spent 4 years inside that estate, close enough to the real Evelyn to know her not as a portrait or a name on a document, but as a living person with habits, scars, and fears. "3 things," Anna said, "things that cannot be faked because no one would think to research them." Lucian leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "Go ahead." First, the real Lady Evelyn had a crescent-shaped scar on her left wrist. She got it at 11 years old when her horse threw her and her arm caught the paddock fence. It left a mark about the length of your thumb, slightly raised, white against the skin. Anna paused. "The woman upstairs has worn gloves every day since her arrival, indoors, even during private dinners, even on warm afternoons." Lucian said nothing. He had noticed the gloves. He had assumed it was a fashionable affectation. Second, Evelyn Ashford was terrified of thunderstorms. Not uncomfortable, terrified, since childhood. The groundskeeper used to light extra candles in her room at the first sign of clouds, because she would not sleep otherwise. Anna looked at him steadily. 4 nights ago, there was a storm over the capital. I watched from the servants' corridor. Your fiancé sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, and watched the lightning like it was entertainment. The room felt slightly smaller than it had a moment ago. Third, Anna continued, Evelyn hummed when she was nervous, not loudly, under her breath, almost unconsciously, an old folk tune from the Blackmere valleys that her mother used to sing. I heard her do it dozens of times, before meetings with her father, before riding lessons she dreaded, before anything that made her anxious. Anna's jaw tightened slightly. I have listened to your fiancée carefully for 6 weeks. I have never once heard her hum, not at the royal inspection, not during the contract readings, not even tonight, when a man was poisoned at her own engagement feast. Silence settled over the cedar-smelling room. Lucian stared at the wall opposite him, not seeing it. His mind was moving the way it moved in crisis, methodically, without panic, sorting facts into columns. A woman who covered her wrists, who had no fear of storms, who never hummed, who performed grief and shock with the ease of a theater player. It could still be explained away, he told himself. Scars faded. Childhood fears were outgrown. People changed after 4 years abroad. But then he thought about the goblet. Stolen from the infirmary before morning, Anna had told him when they entered, and a quick word with the night physician had confirmed it. The cup was gone. In its place, a faint smell of vinegar, as though someone had rinsed the shelf where it had sat. Evidence did not vanish by accident. Evidence vanished because someone powerful enough to move through a castle unquestioned had removed it. "Why didn't you go to the royal guard?" Lucien asked. "I tried." Something flickered in Anna's expression, not quite bitterness, but close to it. 6 weeks ago, I sent a letter to the captain of the city watch. I was told servants don't make accusations against noble ladies. She paused. 3 days later, I was dismissed from my previous household without explanation. Someone was watching for anyone asking questions. And you stayed anyway. Someone had to. Lucien studied her face for a long moment. She did not look away. In his experience, liars tended to either hold eye contact too deliberately, performing honesty, or break it too quickly. Anna did neither. She simply looked at him the way someone looks when they have said a true thing and are waiting for the world to decide what to do with it. "There is one more thing," Anna said quietly. "I did not want to say it until I was certain you would listen." "Say it." The real Evelyn did not simply go abroad for her education. Anna's voice dropped. She disappeared. Before she ever reached the royal court at Valdres, letters arrived afterward, in her handwriting, with her seal, saying she had arrived safely, that she was thriving, that she was happy. Anna paused. But the last person who saw Evelyn Ashford board a carriage toward Valdres was a stable boy in Blackmere. She was 15 years old. No one in Valdres ever met her. The candle between them guttered. Lucien straightened slowly from the wall. "You said you've been trying to reach me for 6 weeks, he said, "which means you knew this before the engagement was announced." "Yes." "Then whoever placed that woman in Evelyn's name knew this wedding was coming long before it was made public." He looked at her. "This was not improvised. This has been planned for years." Anna nodded once. From somewhere deeper in the castle, a door slammed. Footsteps moved quickly past the corridor outside. Guards, probably, still managing the aftermath of the feast. Neither of them moved. "Get some sleep," Lucien said finally. "Tell no one what you told me tonight, not even Rowan." He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "And Anna, Your Grace? Starting tomorrow, you are reassigned to my personal household staff." He didn't look back. "Where I can see you." He stepped out into the dark corridor. Behind him, for the first time since she had arrived at the capital, Anna exhaled. The road to Blackmere was 3 days of bad weather and worse roads. Lucien had left the capital quietly. No announcement, no fanfare, no convoy of noble carriages drawing attention. He took a plain traveling coach, 2 horses, a packed saddlebag, and 2 people. Anna, riding inside the coach with a servant's travel pass that listed her as a laundry maid, and Rowan, who had discharged himself from the infirmary on the second morning by simply standing up and walking out. "You nearly died," Lucien had told him. "I've nearly died before," Rowan had replied, and climbed onto his horse. To the court, Lucien had sent word that he was visiting his northern properties to finalize wedding gift inventories, the sort of tedious administrative errand that made noblemen's eyes glaze over and produced no follow-up questions. Celeste, he had begun thinking of her as Celeste in his mind now, because calling her Evelyn felt like swallowing a lie, had smiled warmly and told him to travel safely. He had watched her eyes while she said it. They were completely empty. Blackmere announced itself before it was visible. A drop in temperature, a thickening of the trees, a particular gray quality to the light that felt less like weather and more like the land itself was holding its breath. The Ashford estate sat 3 miles beyond the village, down a lane that had not seen regular cart traffic in years. Weeds split the stones. Branches reached across from both sides until the lane felt less like a road and more like a tunnel. The manor itself came into view just as the sky turned the color of a bruise. It was not ruined. Not entirely. But it was the next closest thing. Shutters hung at angles. Ivy had consumed the east wing so completely that the windows were invisible beneath it. The fountain in the front courtyard had gone dry, and filled instead with dead leaves and standing rainwater. Whatever the Ashford family had once been, it had not been this. "It went fast," Anna said quietly, looking out the coach window. "After Lady Evelyn's parents sailed for the Eastern Territories and never came back, the estate just stopped. The staff were let go one by one. There was no one left to maintain it." "Convenient," Rowan said from his horse, in the tone he used when things were not convenient at all. A single lamp burned in the groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the property, a low stone building half hidden by an overgrown hedge. Lucian knocked himself, without sending Rowan ahead. Old men who lived alone in abandoned estates had learned, through hard experience, not to open doors for armed strangers. The man who answered was perhaps 70, white-haired, with the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades outdoors. His name was Edmund. He had tended the Ashford grounds for 40 years. He recognized Anna before she spoke a word. "Girl," he said, and his face did something complicated, relief and grief arriving at the same moment. He pulled her into an embrace that she returned without hesitation, and for a moment the abandoned estate felt briefly, painfully human. Then Lucian produced the portrait. It was a miniature he had taken from the castle, a formal painting of his fiancée, commissioned 3 months ago when the engagement was announced. Edmund took it from his hands, held it close to his lamp, and studied it for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed entirely. "That is not her," he said, simply. "The way old men state facts they have no reason to soften. I would know that girl's face in a pitch-dark room. I watched her grow from a child of 6 to a young woman of 15. He handed the portrait back. "Whoever that is, she is not the daughter I served." "Tell me about the day she left," Lucian said. Edmund set the lamp on the table and sat down heavily. He told them what he remembered, and he remembered it with the sharp clarity of something that had troubled him for years without resolution. Evelyn had left on a gray morning in late spring, nearly 6 years ago. A private carriage, arranged by her father's solicitor, to take her north toward Valdres for her royal education. She had been nervous, humming that song of hers, Edmund said, which made Anna go very still, and she had hugged Edmund at the gate and told him she would write. She never did. "But letters came," Edmund continued, "from the court at Valdres, her seal, her handwriting, saying she was well, happy, thriving." He looked at his hands. "The last one arrived about 2 years after she left, said she had made wonderful friends and hoped to visit Blackmere the following summer." A long pause. "She never came." "And her parents?" Lucian asked. "Died abroad the same year. Of fever," the solicitor said. Edmund's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Everything wrapped up very neatly, Your Grace. Parents gone, estate abandoned, girl abroad, no one left to ask questions." Lucian stood up. "Edmund, I need to see her rooms, her father's study. Any records left in this house?" Edmund led them through cold, dark corridors that smelled of dust and damp stone. Evelyn's childhood bedroom was untouched, a small room with faded yellow curtains and a shelf of books. Anna moved through it slowly, picking things up and setting them down again, her expression unreadable. Lucian went to the father's study. The filing cabinets had been emptied, methodically, not ransacked. Someone had come here before them and removed things with patience and purpose. But in the back of the lowest drawer, wedged behind a loose panel, Lucian's fingers found a leather-bound ledger. Family accounts, correspondence records, property documents. Half the pages were brittle with age. He tucked it inside his coat. That was when Anna appeared in the doorway behind him. "Something's wrong," she said. He could already smell it. Smoke, thin and sharp, threading through the dust from somewhere on the east side of the building. Through the study window, he saw the first orange flicker rising from the old records room across the courtyard, then the second, then the third. "They followed us," Rowan said from the corridor, his sword already drawn. Lucian did not run. He walked, quickly, deliberately, back through the corridor, through the front door, and out into the courtyard where shadows moved at the edges of the firelight. Masked figures, 4 of them, maybe 5, pulling back toward the tree line as the flames took hold. They were not trying to kill him tonight. They were trying to make sure he found nothing. Edmund's cottage records, the family portraits, the correspondence files, all burning. But Lucian pressed his hand against the ledger inside his coat and felt its edges against his ribs. They had been 1 drawer too late. The capital never slept during masquerade season. For 2 weeks every autumn, the royal court threw open its grandest halls and invited every noble, diplomat, and person of influence within riding distance, to attend a series of masked galas, evenings where identity was technically hidden, and therefore everything said could be technically denied. It was, in Lucian's opinion, the most honest event the court produced all year. People were far more truthful when they believed no one knew their face. He had returned from Blackmere, with mud still on his boots and ash still in his hair, smiled at Celeste over dinner, told her the estate visit had been productive, and watched her watch him. She was searching for cracks, the slight tension around the eyes, the half-second pause before an answer that would tell her how much he knew. He gave her nothing. That evening, he sent Anna to his private study with the half-burned ledger and a single instruction: find any names that don't belong. The masquerade was held at the Royal Crescent, the Crown's entertainment palace, a sweeping building of white stone and arched glass that sat at the heart of the capital like a pearl in an oyster. Lucian arrived in a black mask trimmed with silver. Celeste wore deep burgundy silk and a mask of gold filigree that covered everything above her mouth. She was magnificent. That was the difficult part. Whatever else she was magnificent, graceful, charming, effortlessly commanding every room she entered. Watching her work a crowd was like watching a master musician play an instrument. Every laugh was timed, every touch of the arm was calculated, every glance across a room landed exactly where she intended. Lucian danced with her twice. During the first dance, he tested her. "Do you remember the old mill pond near Blackmere village?" he asked pleasantly, as though making idle conversation. "You mentioned once that you used to catch frogs there as a girl." A half-second pause. So brief, a less attentive man would have missed it entirely. "Of course," she said, smiling up at him, "though I was absolutely terrible at it. I had no patience for waiting." It was a perfect answer, vague, warm, personal enough to feel real. He filed it away and said nothing. During the second dance he tried again. "Your old music tutor, what was his name? The one your mother dismissed for teaching you drinking songs instead of hymns." This time the pause was fractionally longer. "Master Fenwick," she said, with a small laugh. Poor man. Mother had no sense of humor about it. Lucian smiled and said nothing. He had invented both the mill pond and the music tutor entirely. She had confirmed them both without hesitation. She was not recalling memories, she was constructing them. Anna was not at the masquerade as a guest. She was there as a server. Plain gray uniform, silver tray, invisible in the way that servants at these events were always invisible. She moved through the halls slowly, watching not the dancing, but the edges of the room, where the real conversations happened. She noticed it first with Lord Harwick, a heavy-set man in a blue coat, who held regional authority over the western trade roads. He found Celeste near the refreshment table during a break in the music, and their exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. But Anna was close enough to observe that Harwick did not bow when he approached her. Noblemen always bowed to their future duchess. Harwick did not bow. He spoke to her the way a man speaks to an equal in a business arrangement. Direct, low, efficient. And Celeste responded the same way. No warmth, no performance. Just information exchanged, and a small nod of confirmation, before they separated and rejoined the party as though nothing had occurred. 20 minutes later, Anna watched Celeste have the same exchange with a thin woman in green, whom Anna recognized as the wife of the Eastern Harbor Commissioner. Then, with a young lord whose family controlled 3 of the kingdom's northern supply routes. Not admirers, not well-wishers, partners. Anna kept her tray level, and her face blank, and moved through the room like furniture, cataloging every face, every exchange, every name she could attach to a body. At midnight, Celeste disappeared. Anna had been watching for it, the moment when the performance paused and the real business began. She followed at a distance, staying in the servants' corridors that ran parallel to the main halls, navigating by sound and instinct through the dim passageways behind the palace walls. Celeste moved with the confidence of someone who had memorized this route. Down 2 levels, through a door disguised as a wall panel, into a low stone corridor that predated the palace above it by several centuries. Anna followed. The corridor opened into a small vaulted chamber, a wine cellar by original design, now empty of barrels. 3 oil lamps burned on the floor. 2 men waited there, their masks removed. Anna pressed herself into the shadows behind a stone pillar and held her breath. She recognized one of the men from the feast, Lord Harwick, the one who hadn't bowed. Celeste removed her gold mask. Without it, her face was different, harder, sharper, stripped of the softness she wore upstairs like a costume. This was the real face. Not cruel, exactly, but entirely without warmth. "The ledger," Harwick said immediately. "We burned the records room, but our man says Aldrich left before we could confirm." "He found something," Celeste said, not a question. "Possibly. It changes nothing. The wedding is in 9 days. Once it's done." "He's been testing me," Celeste said quietly. "Tonight, twice, inventing memories to see if I'd confirm them." A pause. "He's suspicious. Not certain, but suspicious." Harwick's jaw tightened. "Then we moved the second attempt forward." "No." Celeste's voice was flat. "Not yet. If he dies before the wedding, we lose the legal claim to the duchy entirely. He dies after the vows, not before." A silence. Then the second man spoke, and Anna froze, because she knew that voice. She had heard it every week in the castle corridors. Calm, measured, carrying quiet authority. It belonged to Lord Eamon, Lucian's most senior advisor. "The maid," Eamon said. "She was at the feast. She was watching tonight. She's the variable we haven't contained." "Find her," Celeste said simply. "Tonight." Anna was already moving. She made it 3 corridors before a hand closed around her arm. Lucian noticed Anna was missing at dawn. He had returned from the masquerade late, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink, and sat in his private study with the burned ledger open on the desk. He worked through it page by page, marking names, cross-referencing dates, building a map in his head of who knew what and when. At some point the candle burned low, and the city outside his window went from dark to gray. He sent for Anna at first light. She didn't come. He sent again, a different servant, same result. By the time Rowan appeared in the doorway with the particular expression he wore when delivering news he didn't want to deliver, Lucian already knew. "She's gone," Rowan said. Her room was empty, no sign of struggle, but her shoes were left behind. People who left voluntarily took their shoes. Lucian closed the ledger. He spent 2 days moving carefully, asking no loud questions, drawing no attention, while quietly dismantling every movement Celeste's people had made since the night of the masquerade. A bribed palace footman remembered 2 men carrying what he assumed was a sleeping drunk through the eastern servant exit at approximately 1 in the morning. A stable hand recalled an unmarked black carriage departing north before sunrise. North. Lucian spread a map across his study table and traced the northern roads with his finger. Away from the capital, away from the coast, up into the mountain territories where the kingdom's authority grew thin and the church's authority grew thick. A dozen monasteries sat in those peaks, old buildings, isolated, self-sufficient, answerable to nobody in particular. He went back to the burned ledger. On the 14th page, partially destroyed but still legible, was a land record, a property transfer made 6 years ago, shortly after Evelyn's disappearance. A small parcel of northern mountain land, previously belonging to the Ashford estate, transferred to a religious foundation called the Order of St. Marin. He had never heard of it. Rowan had. "Remote place," Rowan said, studying the map coordinates. 3 days north. The monks there don't interact much with the outside world. He paused. "There have been rumors for years, travelers who stop there for shelter and come back talking about sounds from the lower levels, crying, sometimes screaming." He looked at Lucian. "Everyone assumed it was penitents doing penance. Or prisoners," Lucian said. They left within the hour. The monastery of St. Marin clung to the mountainside like something that had grown there, rather than been built. All dark stone and narrow windows, surrounded by pine forest that muffled sound from every direction. A high wall enclosed the grounds. The gate was heavy iron. Lucian did not knock at the gate. He and Rowan circled the perimeter on foot at dusk, moving through the tree line, until Rowan found what he was looking for, a drainage channel cut into the base of the outer wall, wide enough for a person to pass through if they were willing to get wet and miserable. They were willing. Inside the wall, the monastery was quieter than any inhabited building had a right to be. The monks they glimpsed moved in silence, heads down, purposeful. But the building had 2 sections, the upper chapel and residence, warm with candlelight and incense, and a lower section built into the mountain itself, accessible through a heavy door at the back of the main hall, secured with an iron bolt and a padlock that had been recently oiled. Rowan dealt with the padlock in the way Rowan dealt with most obstacles, efficiently and without sentiment. The stairs beyond the door descended into cold stone and bad air. Wall-mounted torches burned at long intervals, throwing more shadow than light. On either side of the corridor, heavy wooden doors with small iron grates stood at regular intervals. Cells. Some were empty, some were not. Lucian moved quickly, checking each grate, holding a torch close. Hollow-faced men and women stared back. Political prisoners, he realized. People who had inconvenienced someone powerful enough to make them disappear without the messiness of a public execution. He found Anna in the 7th cell. She was sitting upright against the far wall with her knees drawn to her chest, bruised across the left cheekbone, her brown hair loose and tangled. She looked up when the torchlight hit her face, and the expression that crossed it was not relief so much as vindication, the look of someone who had been right about something terrible and taken no pleasure in it. "I wondered when you'd get here," she said. "2 days," he said. "I came as fast as I could." "I know." She stood without help. "There's someone else you need to hear." 3 cells down from Anna, they found him. An old man, white-bearded, rail-thin, dressed in the remnants of what had once been a physician's robe. He shrank from the torchlight at first, blinking like a man who had not seen a proper flame in a long time. His name was Dr. Aldrich Voss. He had served as personal physician to the Ashford family for 20 years. He had been in this cell for 4 of them. Lucian crouched to his level and spoke quietly and clearly. "Tell me about Evelyn Ashford." The old man's hands trembled, not from fear, from the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a truth for so long that releasing it is physically painful. He told them everything. Evelyn had been 16, a year after her disappearance, when a carriage had brought her here, not to the monastery, to a private estate nearby, belonging to a lord whose name Voss whispered, as though even now it might call something down on him. She had been kept there, hidden, maintained alive but isolated, fed and clothed but imprisoned, because the men who had taken her could not afford to kill her, not then. She had documentation. She had witnessed things. What did she witness? Lucian asked. Voss looked at him steadily. "Your betrothal," he said, "or rather, what it was designed to accomplish." He paused to gather himself. "The Dukes of 3 territories met in Blackmere 6 years ago. A private meeting, no records, no witnesses, except one. Evelyn came home early from a riding lesson and walked into her father's study. The old man's voice dropped. They were planning a coordinated seizure, 3 duchies acting together to surround and absorb yours through a combination of legal marriage ties and, if that failed, assassination. Evelyn heard enough to destroy them." He exhaled slowly. "So they destroyed her first." The cell was very quiet. "She's dead," Lucian said, not a question. Voss nodded once, and the weight of it settled into the cold air like something physical. "She tried to escape 2 years ago, made it as far as the lake ruins near Blackmere." He closed his eyes. "They found her 3 days later." Anna had gone very still beside Lucian. He stood up slowly. Outside, somewhere above them, a bell tolled the monastery's night hour, slow, resonant, indifferent. The sound moved through the stone walls and faded into the mountain. "Can you walk?" Lucian asked Voss. The old man looked at his feet, then at the open cell door. "I've been waiting 4 years to answer that question," he said. The coastal city of Valence smelled of salt, fish, and freedom. It was the kind of city that asked no questions, a port town built on the understanding that people arrived from difficult places and preferred not to explain themselves. Ships came and went at all hours. Money changed hands in doorways. Half the population had a second name they used, depending on who was asking. It was, Lucian reflected, the perfect place to disappear. Dr. Voss had given them the name before they left the monastery, whispered it like something fragile, as though speaking it too loudly might shatter the only lead they had left. A girl named Mara, living near the harbor district, working as a seamstress, kept to herself, asked no questions, and answered fewer. Her real name was Sophia Ashford, Evelyn's younger half-sister, born to the same father, different mother, acknowledged quietly by the family, but never publicly. Illegitimate daughters and noble houses existed in a particular kind of limbo, present enough to be known, invisible enough to be forgotten. When the Ashford estate collapsed, Sophia had done what survivors do. She had taken a new name, packed a single bag, and vanished into the kind of city that welcomed vanishing. That had been 4 years ago. They found her on the third morning. The seamstress shop was narrow and deep, a sliver of a building wedged between a rope maker and a tavern, with a green painted door and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Alterations and fine work. No rush orders." Anna went in first, alone, on Lucian's instruction. A strange man appearing at the door of a woman in hiding would close every door before a word was spoken. Inside, behind a counter stacked with folded fabric, a young woman looked up from her work. She was perhaps 22, slight, with dark eyes and a careful, watchful face. The face of someone who had learned to assess a room in the first 3 seconds of entering it. Her resemblance to the portrait of the real Evelyn was faint but present, the way family resemblance often was, less a copy than an echo. The same jaw, the same set of the eyes. She looked at Anna. Something moved across her face. "No," she said immediately, and stepped back from the counter. "No. Whatever you're here for. No. My name is Anna. I served at Blackmere when you were—" "I know who you are." Sophia's voice was low and controlled, but her hands had stopped moving entirely. "I know exactly who you are. And whoever sent you, the answer is still no." Anna placed both hands flat on the counter. "Evelyn is dead, Sophia." The room went very quiet. Sophia did not cry. She did not collapse. She simply stood completely still, the way people stand when they receive news they already knew somewhere deep and private, and hearing it spoken aloud only moves it from one room inside them to another. "I know," she said finally. "I've known for 2 years." Anna glanced toward the door. "Then you know why we're here." Lucian and Rowan came inside. Sophia assessed Lucian with the particular expression of someone who had been betrayed by nobility before, and catalogued the experience carefully for future reference. She did not offer him a seat. She stood behind her counter with the posture of a woman on her own ground, who had not yet decided whether to defend it or abandon it. "You're the Duke," she said. "Yes. The one they arranged all of this for." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "And what do you want from me?" "The truth," Lucian said. "All of it. Whatever Evelyn left behind." Sophia laughed. A short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "The truth nearly got my sister killed before it finished the job. The truth got an old physician locked in a mountain cell for 4 years. The truth got—" She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. "Why would I give it to you?" "Because I already know most of it," Lucian said. "The conspiracy. The 3 dukes, the plan to take my duchy through marriage and assassination. Celeste placed as a replacement to give them legal standing after my death." He watched her face as he listed each point. "I have a burned family ledger, a physician's testimony, and the names of at least 4 co-conspirators. What I don't have is proof that rises above a court challenge. Something in Evelyn's own hand, something undeniable." Sophia held his gaze. "And if I help you," she said, "what happens to me? I'm illegitimate. I have no legal standing. The moment I surface publicly, I become a problem someone needs to solve." "You become my formally recognized witness under ducal protection," Lucian said, "which means anyone who touches you answers to me." "Noble protection," Sophia said flatly. "The same protection that kept my sister safe." The silence stretched between them. It was Anna who broke it, not with an argument, but with something simpler. She reached into her coat and placed a small object on the counter between them. A hair ribbon, faded blue, frayed at the ends, with a tiny embroidered flower near one end that had been repaired at least twice. Sophia went very still. "I found it in her room at Blackmere," Anna said quietly. "She used to wear it every day." Sophia picked it up with both hands. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she set it down, turned, and disappeared through a door at the back of the shop. She returned carrying a wooden box, the kind used for storing letters, sealed with a small brass lock. She set it on the counter and produced a key from around her neck. Inside were letters, perhaps 30 of them, written in a neat, careful hand. Different dates spanning 3 years. The later ones were shakier, the ink sometimes blurred, the margins crowded as though she'd been afraid she was running out of pages. "She found ways to get them out," Sophia said. "One of the servants at the estate where they kept her. He didn't know what they said, only that she needed them delivered." She paused. "I never replied. I was terrified replying would get him caught. Her voice remained steady, but something behind her eyes was not. I don't know if she thought I'd abandoned her. Lucian picked up the first letter carefully. Within 3 lines, it was clear that Evelyn had documented everything. Names, dates, overheard conversations, descriptions of the men who came to check on her. The letter named Lord Harwick. It named 2 other regional lords. It named their plan in precise, damning detail. And it named Lord Eamon, Lucian's senior advisor, the man who had sat at his table for 11 years, the man who had attended every private council meeting, every strategic discussion, every sensitive conversation about Lucian's future that had ever taken place within the castle walls. Lucian set the letter down. He did not allow his face to change. "Rowan," he said, "Your Grace, when we return to the capital, say nothing to Eamon. Nothing at all. Not even a greeting that's different from usual." He looked up. "He cannot know we have these." Rowan nodded once. Lucian turned to Sophia. "Will you come?" She looked at the box of letters, at Anna, at the ribbon still on the counter. "Evelyn spent 3 years writing those," she said, hoping someone would eventually read them. She picked up the ribbon and tied it around her wrist. "Yes, I'll come." Lucian returned to the capital wearing the same easy smile he had left with. He embraced Celeste in the main courtyard, told her he had missed her, presented her with a strand of sea pearls he had purchased in Vilaine, and watched her eyes move past him, counting the people who had returned with him. Her gaze snagged briefly on Anna, then moved on. He saw the calculation happening behind her face. She was deciding whether Anna's continued presence meant Lucian knew nothing, or everything. He gave her his most untroubled expression, and told her the wedding preparations looked magnificent. She smiled back. 2 people standing in a sunlit courtyard, each completely aware the other was lying, neither willing to show it first. It was, in its way, an impressive standoff. That evening, Lucian called a private meeting with his 3 most trusted household knights, men who had served him since before his father died, men whose loyalty had been tested and confirmed multiple times in situations that mattered. He told them nothing about Celeste, nothing about the conspiracy, nothing about Evelyn's letters. He told them only this: in 5 days, there would be a pre-wedding feast at Moonvale Castle, his countryside fortress. He needed the guest list controlled, the wine managed personally, and every entrance and exit staffed with their men specifically, not the regular castle guard, whose loyalties he could no longer entirely guarantee. The knights asked no questions. That was why he trusted them. Sophia was installed quietly in the East Wing, under the name of a seamstress brought in for last-minute alterations to the wedding wardrobe. Dr. Voss was given a room in the lower staff quarters, officially listed as a medical consultant. Anna remained in her role as household staff, close enough to observe, invisible enough to move freely. The trap was built slowly, carefully, like a house of cards in a room with a slight draft. Every piece had to be placed exactly right, or everything collapsed. The announcement of the pre-wedding feast at Moonvale came 4 days before the wedding. Lucian framed it as tradition, a private gathering for his closest allies before the public ceremony in the capital. Intimate, personal, a chance to celebrate before the formality of the cathedral. The guest list included every noble he suspected of involvement in the conspiracy, alongside enough innocent guests to prevent it looking targeted. Celeste received the announcement at breakfast. Lucian watched her read it. Her reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight slowing of the hand that held the paper, a single blink that lasted a fraction too long. Then she set it down and said it sounded lovely. But that afternoon, Anna reported seeing her in a brief, tense exchange with one of her personal handmaidens, a young woman who had arrived with Celeste from the royal court, and who had, on 3 separate occasions, been observed near the kitchen stores without any obvious reason to be there. The handmaiden's name was Petra. Rowan had Petra quietly followed. By evening they had confirmation. Petra had made contact with a man outside the castle's western gate, who was known to supply certain untraceable substances to certain discreet clients in the capital's wealthier districts. "Second poisoning attempt," Rowan said, setting the report on Lucian's desk. "During the feast." "As expected," Lucian said. "The wine again?" "No, too obvious after last time." Lucian thought for a moment. "The food. Something that takes longer. So it happens after the feast. Private, attributable to natural illness." Rowan nodded. "Do we intercept Petra now?" "No, we let her proceed." He looked up at Rowan's expression. We need Celeste to believe the plan is still working. The moment Petra is stopped, Celeste changes strategy. We cannot afford that 4 days before the wedding. Rowan looked profoundly unhappy about this, but said nothing. Make sure every dish served to me at the feast comes from a separately prepared kitchen source, Lucian added. No one needs to know why. Tell the head cook it's a dietary matter. 3 days before the wedding, Lord Eamon arrived at Moonvale. Lucian greeted him in the Great Hall with 11 years of practiced warmth, the handshake, the shoulder clasp, the familiar ease of long acquaintance. Eamon was 60, silver-haired, with the mild expression of a man who had spent decades making other men comfortable enough to trust him. He was very good at his job. He had been very good at his real job too, apparently. Watching him move through the castle that evening, greeting guests, sharing wine, laughing at the right moments, Lucian felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Not anger, something colder and more precise than anger. Betrayal had a particular weight to it, heavier than most things. That night, one of Lucian's household knights found him in his study, with an expression that meant the news was not good. It wasn't. Lord Eamon's personal secretary, a young man named Castor who had accompanied him to Moonvale, had been seen entering the chambers where Dr. Voss was housed. He had not gone inside. He had stood at the door long enough to confirm someone was there, then left quickly. Eamon knew Voss was at Moonvale. How? Lucian asked. Petra, Rowan said from the doorway. She must have counted the new arrivals and reported to Celeste. Celeste told Eamon. Lucian stood very still. Voss needs to be moved tonight, he said. Somewhere Eamon's people won't think to look. And Castor? Watch him. Don't touch him. Voss was moved to Anna's room, a servant's quarter so ordinary and overlooked that no conspirator would think to check it. He sat on the narrow cot with the quiet patience of a man who had survived 4 years in a monastery cell, and found most other inconveniences manageable by comparison. The following morning, Lucian came down to breakfast to find Eamon already at the table, pouring coffee with a steady hand and a pleasant expression. You seem tired, Your Grace, Eamon said. Pre-wedding nerves, Lucian replied. Eamon smiled sympathetically. Entirely understandable. Lucian picked up his coffee. Then, at noon, a knight came to find him with his face arranged in careful neutrality, the specific expression trained men wore when the news was very bad and other people were nearby. Lord Eamon's secretary Castor was dead, found in the lower corridor with a single puncture wound, already cold. No weapon, no witnesses. Lucian stared at the report. Castor had known too much about what Eamon knew, and Eamon had decided that was a liability. His own man, killed to close a gap. Lucian set the report face down on the desk. The wedding was in 2 days, and the man who had sat at his council table for 11 years had just demonstrated exactly how far he was willing to go. The Cathedral of St. Aldrich had stood at the heart of the capital for 400 years. Its stone walls were 3 feet thick. Its ceilings rose so high that candle smoke disappeared before reaching them. On important occasions, the bishops lined the nave in ceremonial robes of white and gold, and the combined weight of institutional authority was heavy enough to make even powerful men feel small. Lucian had chosen it deliberately, not for the grandeur, for the witnesses. 300 nobles, bishops, royal officials, and foreign dignitaries filled the pews on a cold morning that had arrived gray and stayed that way. Outside, the capital's citizens pressed against the cathedral gates, craning for glimpses of the procession. Inside, flowers banked every pillar, candles blazed on every surface, and the air smelled of incense and expensive perfume. Celeste arrived in white. Of course she did. She walked the nave with absolute composure, back straight, chin level, eyes forward, every step precise, every detail of her appearance engineered to communicate legitimacy. The pearl headpiece was the same one Evelyn's family portrait showed, borrowed from the estate inventory and worn with the ease of someone who had spent months becoming the person it belonged to. She was extraordinary at this. Lucian stood at the altar and watched her come and thought, this is the last performance. The ceremony proceeded exactly as planned. The bishop read the opening liturgy, guests settled. The restless shuffling of 300 people finding their positions gradually stilled into the particular silence of a room waiting for something significant to happen. Lucian stood facing Celeste across the altar. She looked up at him with an expression of composed devotion that was essentially perfect. Only her hands, he noticed, were slightly tighter around her bouquet than they needed to be. She was not certain. She had not been certain since Moonvale. The controlled woman who had navigated every challenge for 6 years was, beneath the white silk and the pearl headpiece, just slightly afraid. Good. The bishop turned to the vows. Before these witnesses and in the sight of— "I need a moment," Lucian said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Simply a statement, delivered in the same tone he used at council meetings when redirecting an agenda item. The bishop stopped. 300 people made the particular sound of a crowd collectively inhaling. Celeste went very still. "Your Grace," the bishop said carefully, "the ceremony will resume shortly," Lucian said. "I have something to present to this assembly first. It concerns the identity of the woman standing at this altar." The silence that followed was extraordinary, so complete that the candle flames were audible. Then everyone spoke at once. Lucian raised one hand and the room settled, not because he shouted, but because certain men possess a quality of presence that crowds respond to instinctively. He had spent 31 years developing it. 4 weeks ago, he said, addressing the assembly directly, a maid named Anna warned me not to drink poisoned wine at my own engagement feast. Tonight, I am going to tell you what I found when I began asking why. He nodded toward the side door. Rowan entered first, followed by Sophia, no longer dressed as a seamstress, but in the deep green of a woman making a public statement. Behind them came Dr. Voss, walking slowly but steadily, wearing clean physician's robes that Lucian had arranged. And behind Voss, carrying a sealed wooden box, came Anna. Plain brown dress, rough hands, spine straight as a ship's mast. Celeste looked at Sophia, and something happened in her face. A fracture, small but visible. The first crack in 6 years of flawless performance. She recognized the resemblance. She knew immediately what Sophia's presence meant. Lucian presented the evidence in order. First, Dr. Voss stepped forward and identified himself. His name, his position as family physician to the Ashfords, his 4 years of imprisonment at the monastery of St. Maron. He stated clearly and publicly that the woman at the altar was not Lady Evelyn Ashford, that Evelyn had been imprisoned to silence her testimony about a conspiracy against the duchy, that she had died attempting escape 2 years ago. A wall of murmuring rose and fell. Second, Sophia opened the wooden box and produced the letters, 30 of them, written in Evelyn's hand over 3 years of captivity. Lucian had arranged for 3 independent document examiners to verify the handwriting against known samples the previous day. Their written confirmations were attached. He presented both together. The murmuring became something louder. Third, Lucian held up the half-burned ledger from Blackmere, annotated now, with specific pages marked, names circled, dates connected with lines of reasoning that had taken him 3 weeks to build. "This documents a meeting that took place 6 years ago," he said. "At Blackmere Estate, 3 regional lords coordinating a long-term strategy to seize this duchy through marriage infiltration and assassination. He named them Lord Harwick, Lord Castellan, Lady Morse of the Eastern Territories. All 3 were in the pews. None of them moved. That was almost more telling than if they had run. Fourth, and finally, Lucian reached into his coat and produced a ring, small, gold, set with a dark blue stone in the shape of a crescent moon, the Ashford family's signet, worn by the eldest daughter as a matter of tradition. Evelyn had worn it in every portrait. It had been missing since her disappearance. "This was found in a locked jewelry case in your private chambers," he said to Celeste directly, "by a household search conducted 3 days ago." He held it up so the assembly could see it clearly. "You kept it. After everything else was discarded, the identity, the history, the life, you kept this one thing." He looked at her steadily. "Why?" Celeste said nothing for a long moment. The cathedral was absolutely silent. Then she did something none of them anticipated. She smiled. Not the performed warmth of the woman who had charmed 300 nobles for 6 weeks. Something else, smaller, private, directed only at Lucian. The smile of someone who has played a role for so long that the moment it ends is almost a relief. "Because it was the only real thing in the room," she said quietly. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then it was gone, replaced by something hard and desperate, and she moved, not toward Lucian, toward Anna. The blade came from inside the bouquet, small, thin, the kind of thing a person could carry undetected through a cathedral search if they were skilled enough, and had planned this contingency long in advance. Celeste crossed the altar in 2 steps, with the speed of someone trained for exactly this kind of last resort. Rowan was faster. He stepped between them before the blade completed its arc, took the cut across his forearm without flinching, and had Celeste's wrist locked in his grip before she could adjust. 2 cathedral guards reached them a second later. Celeste did not struggle. She stood in Rowan's grip and looked at Anna with an expression that was neither hatred nor anger. Something more complicated. "You were the variable we couldn't account for," she said. "One servant who remembered a girl's scar." "One servant who paid attention," Anna replied. In the pews, Lord Harwick stood abruptly and turned toward the side exit. The doors opened before he reached them. Lucien's knights had been stationed there since before the ceremony began. Harwick stopped, looked back, sat down. Lady Morse did not attempt to leave at all. She sat perfectly still and stared at the floor with the expression of someone recalculating every decision they had made for the past 6 years. Lord Castellan began to weep quietly. Lord Eamon, seated in the front row, as befitted a senior advisor, had not moved since Voss stepped forward. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, and his face arranged in an expression of calm that had cost him everything he had. When Lucien's gaze found him, Eamon met it without flinching. 11 years, Lucien said. Eamon said nothing. There was nothing to say. The guards came for him last. Blackmere in winter looked like a painting someone had abandoned halfway through. The trees stood bare and silver against a white sky. The lane to the old estate was frozen solid underfoot, each stone sealed beneath a thin crust of ice that cracked softly with every step. The fountain in the courtyard had filled with snow overnight, and the ivy on the east wing had gone from green to the color of dried blood. Lucien had been here 3 times now. The first time, he had been searching for evidence. The second time, he had been running from fire. This time, he had come to finish something. The trials had moved quickly by noble standards, which meant they had taken 6 weeks and felt like 6 months. Celeste had said almost nothing throughout, answering questions with the economy of a woman who had already decided what mattered and what didn't. She confirmed the core facts without being asked twice. Named no one who hadn't already been named. Asked for nothing. At sentencing, when the magistrate asked if she wished to make a statement, she looked at the ceiling for a moment and then said, "I was very good at my work. I regret that it was this work." The magistrate had not known what to do with that. Harwick and Castellan had each attempted, separately, to negotiate reduced sentences by offering additional names. The names they offered were each other's, primarily, and several minor co-conspirators who had already been identified. The negotiations had not gone especially well for either of them. Lady Morse had said nothing at all, and accepted her sentence with the stillness of a woman who had known this was coming for years, and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. Lord Eamon had pleaded guilty on the first day. No negotiation, no testimony, no statement. He had walked into the courtroom, confirmed his name and his crimes, and sat down. Lucien had been present. He had watched the old man's face throughout, and found nothing there that resembled remorse, but nothing that resembled defiance either. Just the particular emptiness of a man who had made his choices at a crossroads years ago, and had simply arrived, at last, at their destination. 11 years. Lucien still turned that number over sometimes, late at night, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth. The investigation into Evelyn's final days had taken longer. It was painstaking, unglamorous work. Interviews with former estate servants, searches of property records, careful examination of the tunnels that ran beneath the old ruins at Blackmere Lake. The lake itself was a cold, dark body of water half a mile from the manor, surrounded by reeds and old stonework from a structure that had collapsed sometime in the previous century. The tunnels had been found on the 4th day of the search. Lucien had not been present for their discovery. He had received the report in his study in the capital and read it twice, then set it face down and sat very still for a while. The investigators had found evidence of habitation, a rough pallet, a water vessel, the remnants of a small fire, signs that someone had lived there briefly, hiding, perhaps resting between attempts to move further, and a journal, small, leather-covered, its pages warped from damp but largely legible, written in the same neat hand as the letters Sophia had kept in her wooden box, but different in tone, quieter. The letters had been written for an audience, crafted to inform and document. The journal had been written only for herself. Lucian had read it once, alone. He had not read it again. They buried Evelyn Ashford on a Thursday. The grave was beside her parents, a small, private plot at the edge of the Blackmere estate grounds, beneath an oak tree that had been there longer than the manor. The headstone was simple, by Lucian's instruction. Her name. Her dates. Nothing that required explanation. The attendants were few. Sophia stood at the graveside in black, the blue ribbon tied at her wrist, her face composed in the way of people who have already done their grief privately and come to the public moment empty and quiet. Dr. Voss stood beside her, leaning on a cane, his white beard immaculate. Rowan stood slightly apart from everyone, his bandaged forearm held carefully at his side, his expression the same one he wore in difficult situations, steady, present, asking for nothing. Anna stood nearest the grave. The priest read the words that priests read at these moments. Ancient language, worn smooth by repetition, carrying weight not from novelty, but from the sheer accumulated mass of all the times it had been spoken before, for all the people who had needed it. When he finished, Sophia stepped forward and placed a single flower on the fresh earth. White. Simple. Then she stepped back and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say, and she was wise enough to know it. Lucian stood at the edge of the gathering and watched. He had paid for the burial. He had organized the investigation that found her. He had ensured her name was cleared publicly, her story told accurately in the official record, her killers brought before a court. He had done every formal, practical, necessary thing. And yet standing here at the frozen edge of Blackmere in the thin winter light, he felt the particular inadequacy of all formal, practical, necessary things. Evelyn Ashford had been 16 years old when they took her life away from her. She had spent 3 years documenting the truth in letters she could only hope might someday reach the right hands. She had spent 2 more years in dwindling hope, her handwriting growing shakier, the margins of her journal crowding as though she knew she was running out of space. She had died cold, alone, in a tunnel beneath a ruined lake wall, close enough to the estate where she had grown up that on a clear day she might have been able to see the chimneys. One person had remembered her. One plain-dressed, rough-handed, entirely overlooked servant who had paid attention to a girl's scar and a hummed song, and the particular way real fear looked different from performed fear. After the burial, the others drifted back toward the warmth of the manor. Lucian stayed. He was not certain why, exactly. There was nothing left to do here. No evidence to find, no mystery to unravel, no threat to neutralize. Just a grave beneath an oak tree at the edge of a frozen property, and the particular silence of a place where something irrevocable had happened. Anna stayed too. She stood a few feet away from him, her coat pulled close against the cold, looking out across the lake. The ice on its surface caught the pale morning light and threw it back in flat silver sheets. The reeds along the bank were stiff and brown. Somewhere in the tree line, a single bird called twice and then stopped. "She wrote about you," Anna said finally. Lucian looked at her. In the journal, near the end, Anna kept her eyes on the lake. She wrote that she hoped whoever ended up with the duchy was worth the trouble, that she hoped they were the kind of person who listened to the people other people ignored. A pause. "She didn't know your name, she just called you the Duke. She was 16 when they took her," Lucian said. "Yes. She spent 3 years making sure the truth survived, even if she didn't." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "She was braver than any person in that cathedral," he said. "Braver than any lord who ran for the door, or wept in their pew, or bargained with a magistrate." He looked back at the grave. She had no power, no guards, no allies, nothing except the certainty that the truth was worth writing down. Anna said nothing. She had already known this. She had known it from the first moment she'd stood in that banquet hall with her heart hammering and her hands steady and chosen to speak, when every instinct for self-preservation told her to stay silent. The wind moved through the bare oak branches. Lucian reached into his coat and produced a small folded document, formal paper, sealed with his personal mark. He held it out toward Anna without ceremony. She unfolded it slowly, read it once, then again. It was an official appointment, head of household intelligence, Aldrich Duchy, reporting directly and exclusively to the Duke. A formal title, a formal salary, a formal position of trust. The kind of document that transformed a person from invisible to undeniable. "This is not a reward," he said. "I'm not good enough at rewarding people. Consider it a correction." He looked at her. "You were the only person in this entire story who did the right thing from the beginning, and kept doing it regardless of the cost. That deserves something more permanent than gratitude. Anna looked at the document for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it inside her coat, close to her chest, next to the place where fear used to live. She would have liked this ending, she said. It's not quite an ending, Lucian said. Eamon's network had 3 layers we haven't fully mapped. Celeste had contacts in 2 foreign courts. Sophia needs a legal identity established before anyone challenges it. He glanced sideways at her. There is a great deal of work still to do. Anna almost smiled. Is that your way of saying you need me? That is my way of saying the duchy needs you, he said. There is a distinction, though at the moment it amounts to the same thing. The pale winter sun crept above the tree line and threw long shadows across the frozen lake. Somewhere beneath that ice and that cold water and those silent reeds, the truth had spent years waiting. One girl had written it down, one servant had spoken it aloud, and the kingdom that had nearly fallen because of a single stolen identity stood this morning, quietly and imperfectly, on slightly firmer ground. It was not a triumphant ending, it was an honest one, which, Evelyn Ashford might have said, was always the harder thing to find.